for working on that. Next is review possible options for the future of the cable TV operation, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator, and Jennifer Rayque, Human Resources Manager, Assistant to the City Administrator. Steve and Jennifer, take it away.
Thank you. I will start, and then I will turn it over to Jennifer at some point in the presentation here. Many of you know that we have a contract with VidCom. It's a 3-year agreement with the opportunity of two 2-year extensions. The first 3-year phase of this ends on March 31st of 2017, so about a year from right now. You know that Dan Kummer has passed away recently, and in recent conversations, the Cable TV Committee has decided that they really don't want to look at an extension when this 3 years ends. Obviously, Dan was an important part of what that organization brought to the table. So they're looking at options for what's going to be about a year from now. And a couple things have been discussed. One, obviously, the possibility of doing another request for proposal. I've been here through a couple of these, and we haven't gotten a lot of bidders. In fact, I think we've had VidCom only each of the 2 times. But there's certainly the opportunity for others to bid who might be able to do cable programming. The other possibility is city employment. It's been brought up as a possibility whether or not we could bring them into the city, make them a department per se, and have them be, wages and salaries and report to me or someone else and be part of us proper. There have been pros and cons discussed each way. Once upon a time, this was brought up, I understand, and the idea was kind of watered down a little bit, I think, because of the fact that benefits like health insurance, life insurance, all those extras, the overhead that comes from those, made it difficult to make the budget work with franchise fees. And we do get about a little bit under $250,000 a year in franchise fees. And the goal of the council has been historically to stay within that. We haven't spent tax levy funds in the past on cable TV. We could if we wanted to, but we haven't. We stayed within that total franchise fee collection. So I asked Jennifer to take a little look at what it could be if, in fact, we tried to make that group city employees, what it would cost and what the pros and cons might be. And I'd like to ask her to maybe give a little report right now.
Sure. So we looked at job descriptions for a coordinator and production manager, an assistant coordinator, technology manager, and an administrative assistant. When we looked at this proposal, we looked at the 2 coordinator and assistant coordinator being 1.0 FTEs and then a half-time FTE for an administrative assistant. In looking at the salary ranges, and just, those were determined with the assistance of Carlson Detman, our consultant for compensation, based on a job description that we had created. When we looked at that, when we're talking wages and benefits, the cost for those 3 positions as is about $185,000 per year. Again, salary and benefits only. We had since learned that the administrative assistant is actually a 1.0 FTE in the current model, and if we were to go with a 1.0 FTE, that would add an additional $63,000 with the second half of the salary and benefits. So with that, it would bring the total cost in terms of salary and benefits up to approximately $248,000 in total. Now, keeping in mind that does not take account for the camera operators, and we do have several of those that average 2 to 10 hours a week at a rate of about $10 an hour. So that was not included in that $248,000. So we did also include in your packet the current contract that we have with VidCom. If you look at that contract, it does show that there's a base cost of $71,460 per year. That is service alone, and then there are supplemental costs based on additional meetings that are recorded and additional services that we may ask for them, whether it be community events, public forums, meetings, candidate debates. Those are all additional costs. In looking at their overall cost per year, we were looking in terms of charges at about $153,000, $158,000 per year in addition to that $71,000. So that'll give you kind of an estimate of where we're sitting right now on an annual basis, and gives you an idea of what would happen if we did use the full salary and benefits for city employment.
So currently we pay $70,000 and $150,000 total together.
Based on the cost that we take out. Keith can probably clarify that as well.
Okay.
So coming back to me for a minute to kind of put a ribbon and bow on it for the moment as we get ready to have conversation. We have 2 people, actually 3 people who are doing the jobs right now, and they would perhaps be interested in being city employees. You just heard Jennifer say that the total cost is a lot more than we expected. In fact, if it was 3 FTE, it would barely fit under the budget that we have right now without doing anything else. So I think that would have to be scaled back at the least. But we also have somebody who's indicated an interest to be our contractor if, in fact, we leave VidCom, somebody who believes that they could do the work. But none of this is about specifics. It's not about who would be interested in bidding as a contractor or who would be interested in being employees, because we would certainly have to post for those positions as well. It's about the model. It's about just a discussion about what you want out of the cable TV operation, what model you feel you would like to see us working toward as we have this next up to 12 months to try and put something in place. So tonight we're looking for your discussion, your thoughts in terms of what direction to go in this fork in the road, and what you'd like to see us find for more information, if need be, where you want to go with it.
I don't know who wants to start. I guess I would like a little better picture of what we're actually paying right now. I think that would help, and what services we're actually being provided. I'm sure a lot happens that I'm not aware of. I don't know if all of you are in the know about everything.
Well, I think we've historically stayed within the budget. I don't think we've gone beyond the budget. And since I've been here, yeah, believe it or not, people have thought for a while that the franchise fee was going to drop because people are going from cable TV to dish and all these kind of things. That's been prophesied for a long time. When I was in Ripon, they always kept saying, what are we going to do when the franchise fee falls down? Because people are subscribing to cable TV less and less. But somehow Charter's revenues, because their prices go up as well, continue to slowly increase. So we've gone from about 215 or 220,000 when I first got here, I think, up to maybe 240 or so right now. And there doesn't seem to be any imminent drop. And we've stayed within the budget. So that's what we've spent, a little less than $250,000 over the past 3 to 5 years on an annual basis.
Raise your hand. Go ahead, Mr.
I'll start this off. I guess I'd like to see it go out for RFP. The idea, in all different systems work, but the idea of the city controlling our cable television kind of reminds me of a government-controlled TV where, their citizens are brainwashed with propaganda that the city wants, and that's probably. And I say that. I say it somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but there could be, by some citizens, that could be, imply that people could be uncomfortable for or with that. So I would say we go for the request for proposal on it and see what's out there and give it a whirl.
We'll go down the line. Mr. Earl.
I think the question we really have to ask ourselves in this discussion is, do we want this to continue? Because if we don't get bids, what do we do then? I mean, the thing will fold if nothing is done.
We clearly have options, though.
Well, yeah, but the question we have to answer for ourselves is, do we want this or not? And if we really want it to continue, then we have to look at things that perhaps we aren't willing to look at.
Mr. Heather?
Yeah, I would, as long as the franchise fees are not affected, they stay the same, I think our RFP route would be a lot better. They'd clearly are operated under some sort of a contract with the city, and we can certainly clean that contract up and shape it into what we want in terms of services, right?
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things that the Cable TV Committee, I think, will be doing in the coming months regardless, and I think it'll involve the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee and Council as well, and that's, what do you expect? Once upon a time, I assumed that this cable TV operation was basically you're taping the council meetings, the plan commission, those kind of things. Well, it's grown over time, and I think people like it. We're covering community events. They show the Dairy Fest parade. A lot of community activities and gatherings are covered. Programming, the cooking show, and all these other things. I think as you look at whether you're going to do it with employees or whether you want to do it with a contractor, I think it's going to come down to what do you expect. Right. That will determine the dollar amount that's going to be the price tag for what you're going to get.
If I see these numbers that you've given us here, Jennifer, where did you get these numbers from? I mean, these classifications.
So the classifications, we had actually created separate job descriptions for those roles and then worked with Carlson Detman, our compensation consultant, in determining the appropriate pay scale for each role. Now, the numbers are a little bit high in terms of the 185,000 that you see, only because we tried to go with the control point for each role so that you would understand, kind of where the pay could go up to. So we weren't either overinflating or underinflating the cost for these positions.
Well, every time the Carlson-Detman thing is mentioned, I get heartburn because it's going to cost the city more money going this direction. And I think if we let out RFPs, we have a contract, we specify what kind of services we want, I think we as a community are better served, because as soon as they get into a city environment, we're going to automatically increase our cost, and then the taxpayer will pay a fee in addition to what we get from the fees from the charter people, right? I mean, it's got to come from somewhere.
I guess ultimately that's the concern too, because not everybody does have charter. Unless you have charter, you're not seeing it.
Well, yeah, that's true too.
Just a second, Mr. Earl, Steve.
I got to believe that the cable TV staff that we have today was surprised to see the expected salaries and benefit costs. But the issue is, I mean, someone could say, well, wait a minute, that's more than they're being paid now by, in some cases, a fair amount. But the reality is, if we bring them into city employees, we have to compare them to everybody else and say, well, what are your duties? What are your responsibilities? Do you need a degree? What technical expertise do you need to do your job? And so they looked at all that and compared them with accountants and everybody else to come up with those estimated salaries.
Mr. Nystrom is here. He's the chairman of the Cable Committee, and he's prepared to do a presentation.
Madam Chair, can I make a comment while we wait for that?
No.
Just quickly.
Just kidding. Go ahead.
April Fool's was a couple days ago.
Sorry, just sassy today.
Two things. One, it's not just public access, because the franchise fees also pay for our Granicus subscription, which allows all of our TV shows to be put online and shared on social media. So it does allow people who are not charter subscribers to view things available on public access. The other component, and I really go back and forth on this whole issue myself as to whether or not it makes sense to make them city employees or whether it makes sense to try and get a contract. Financially, it makes sense to try and get a contract. One of the things we've talked about quite a bit, in fact, the entire time I've been mayor, is how we handle communications in the city of Marshfield. And I know Mr. Wagner has made comments before about how public access really provides us that opportunity to look at ways that we could use that really as a communications department to better communicate with residents beyond just television, whether that be other forms of media, organize our social media presence, et cetera. So there are some benefits to bringing it in-house. Of course, the big benefit to keeping it contracted is price. So just a couple of points there that I want to have considered as we move forward too.
And that did come up in our strategic planning meetings more than once, the idea of having a communications director or at least a central point person for our public communications. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Before you start, Mr. Nystrom, was that type of issue brought into these job descriptions that were presented to Carlson-Detman?
Further advancement in terms of?
Well, like a communications director. I mean, the mayor's saying what we've talked about in other meetings, too.
It was not. We'd actually worked with VidCom to make sure that we had the appropriate level to ensure the continuation of services as they are today.
All right. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I'll rush through this a little bit because I'm kind of busy over at the polls. Huge turnout. There's pluses and minuses to both. You saw the financial impact that was brought up. And in fact, if we paid those wages and benefits, which we should to be competitive within the marketplace, not to lose people, that would eat up essentially our entire budget. In fact, we'd go over budget and we'd be kicked out because we don't have any money for rent. We can't buy new cameras. We can't, do anything. So if that were the case, two things would have to happen if we went city. One would be we would either lay off staff and reduce the amount of services that we provide, which means we'd cut out maybe council meetings. No, I'm just kidding. We would cut out some of the out of studio work and just do studio work programs that you would have people come in, which takes less staffing. Because if you have two people, we have always the luxury of going out and filming a grand opening at an event of some kind, or like the Hardacre dedication and things like that. But the bottom line is that there would be some synergy with the city if the city took it over. We've been asked I think you asked us, Jen, to do an in-service for the city, which we have the equipment to do, but we don't have a policy which says, we are enabled to do work like that for the city or for other semi-city or events, I should say. So that potentially there are some good things that could happen out of it. There'd be the ability to interact with departments to help you, as Steve mentioned, to be able to help a department develop a program to publicize and promote a certain service. Certainly the Parks and Rec would be one of them. And maybe we could send a camera down the sewers for Mike or something, I don't know. But probably not much to see there. And the other issue is that, sure, it's nice to say, let's put out an RFP. But we do not know if we will get a valid bid. That is definitely, yes, we have someone who has expressed initial interest, and it may be a valid offer. But on the other hand, their price might be higher than what the city's price is. And then we'd be in the same boat as we are now, meaning that either we reduce services and go back to what most other communities have, which is basically message boards and public meetings, which is kind of, people like what we're doing. We get all kinds of awards, and the people that work there are great. There's no guarantee that they would work for the city if they were offered a position. They know they would have to apply for it. We don't know if they would or not. So we have to look at the big picture, as Steve suggests. We could try to put it out for an RFP. We could see if there are more than one bidder. The problem when you do that is that sometimes and you know this from bidding things out like Mike does, that you might get a low bid the first year, but then what's your price the second year? Then we have a commitment and so forth. So there's also a possibility that that company, whoever it is, if it's a one-man or two-man operation, we could essentially end up in a similar situation where the person might decide that it's not something they want to continue to do, or they may not be able to meet our expectations. So there's problems potentially that way, but I don't have an opinion. The committee hasn't got an opinion, but we're telling you we have to do something. Either we need to commit to doing something with the city with the understanding that either we reduce services or staffing or we get some tax dollars. Right now, the city puts in $0. It's all cable fees. We get in roughly $250,000 a year, and we generate a profit of about $25,000 to $30,000, which we use to buy equipment with, which we're in the process of doing. We also have a rental agreement. We're paying, I think, $3,000 a month, if I'm not mistaken, or something similar to that. And we have to buy other services too. So the Granicus is one of them, as the mayor mentioned. That's I think $6,500 alone. So that's the issue. It's not a simple decision. And it really depends. It's your system. The franchise agreement is with you. The committee is nothing more than advisory, and we help produce the program. Tell the people that are running it, the VidCom people, what we'd like to see, and accept the bills. And, we really don't have a lot, and we don't have any authority. We're not a commission or utility. We're nothing. We're good people, of course. Very good people with a sincere interest in doing this. Questions?
So is it possible to do, like, as Rich is saying, an RFP, see what we get back, and then make the decision based upon the costs? I don't think an RFP binds us.
Steve's only concern was that if we're going to do a city, we got to budget soon, because I understand that you don't like to do mid-year budget resolutions. Is that correct?
Well, if we can help it, yeah, and we will go into the budget process, in 2 or 3 months from now. I guess that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is trying to nail down that level of service. Like everything we do here, people say, well, what's it cost to have a park and recreation department? Well, what do you want to offer? And that's the same thing here. Historically, we've been growing, and we've been providing more programming that the community likes. But as Don just said, there are a lot of cable stations that just have, the meetings are put on TV, and then otherwise they just run the message board with the announcements that people can read all day. That's the other end of the spectrum. And I think the point being made here is that whether it's us with staff or whether it's people looking at bidding on a new contract, they're going to look at that and they're going to say what's expected of us, and that is ultimately going to translate into the expected cost.
Right.
So I think that's one of the key elements too, is what are we going to want going forward from the cable TV operation?
Exactly. I've heard others express, well, we don't want interference from the city council. One alderman wants to be on 3 days a week at prime time, and we can work around that. The position, if it were city, would have to report to a department head, not to a committee. There'd be no point to assign us to any of the department heads you see here. The only two possible persons that could probably take care of the administrative would either be the city administrator or the weed commissioner, who I don't think has a lot to do. Maybe he does. But essentially, it would have to, based on what other cities do, it would have to report to probably the Steve. And I know he's already got more than he wants to have, probably. But in talking to another municipality that has a city-operated, they recommended strongly that it be appointed not as a subcommittee to somebody else, but to the administrator or assistant administrator if you had one.
So it sounds in our conversations about strategic planning and things as a city council, it sounds like we're leaning heavily toward the type of communications director concept.
Well, that's what's
Not doing RFP would mean bringing it in-house.
And that might bring the question of would the city be willing to throw a few dollars at it because of other things we're going to get out of this. But that's an entirely different topic.
And certainly the topic that needs to be held on a council level, not just.
Correct.
So, you need direction. It says none for information only, but it really sounds like
it's your problem, thank you.
Well, good one. This is the first time you're hearing it. I realize some of you have probably known this day is coming. Gordy's on the committee, and you realize that the VidCom contract is going to expire. But we didn't want to ask for any direction here. We just wanted discussion, this is good. I think we've learned a few things. If you have any direction for us right now, we'll certainly take it. The cable committee is going to be wondering, and the staff out there is going to be wondering what we have in mind. We just didn't expect you to make any big decisions tonight. So.
I think if we do go the RFP route, I think what we need to make sure is, like we kind of touched upon it, Mr. Hendler did, that we have a say when we put out that RFP is exactly what services we want. So when we're talking about communication, a communications director, our communication to the public, I mean, we can have that in mind when we send that out for an RFP, exactly what they would provide. So I think we could channel it through an agreement.
At least for that portion of it. Because the communications director would be more than website would be, all types and forms. Mr. Handler?
I think we ought to, this is just my own feeling, I think we ought to throw the RFP out there, write a good, strong, well-thought-out RFP. If it comes back negative, we can go back to what the other option we have is to incorporate these services into the city. I mean, that's another whole issue, but I try the easy route first and then try the more complicated route later.
I think at the very least, what we might want to do is ask the Cable TV Committee to go back and take a look at the contract with VidCom and the expectations and say, is this still what we think is appropriate? Is it overdone in some areas, underdone in others as far as the amount of programming we expect them to produce? And, those types of things. And then bring it to the elected officials, and you folks can weigh in too. I mean, if we're really going to look for trying to create a communications coordinator or director type of person out of this would be our moment. So maybe you look at what they're expecting and say, well, yeah, we agree with this and we'd like to add on to it, but how are we going to fund that? Or maybe you look at what they're saying and you say, yeah, that's fine, let's bid it out.
I just mentioned that the current contract requires us to do, VidCom to do 10 hours of programming. We greatly exceed that. Yeah. But we've also created expectations from our viewers now that we put it on YouTube, and the whole city can use it, even only the cable subscribers are paying for it. But the whole city can use it, and people outside the city, and I think it's great. We do that thing with those two little bears, and it goes all over the country. People are sending the YouTube link to their families that live in Seattle or whatever, and it's great PR for the city. So in a way, we are doing what you suggest, which is providing an outgoing communication to a larger community than just Marshfield.
Maybe if I can make a suggestion, maybe the Cable TV Committee discusses this at their meeting later in April and then provides some feedback about the expectations, whether you think they're appropriate, whether you think they need to be added to or cut back a little bit, and then it goes to the full council for some review and discussion in May.
We would certainly be happy to do that.
Thank you.
We serve at your pleasure.
Well, then we want you to do no.
Could I go back to work now?
Yes, yes.
Call
Thank
to
you
votes.
so much. We appreciate that. Any other discussion? Otherwise, that sounds fair to me. Any problem? No? All right. Seeing none.